Next on News Talk, AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show with Kevin Doran.
Brian O'Neill in for Kevin Doran again with our regular Friday guest, Dr. Bob, also known as Dr. Robert Heineman, political science professor from Alfred University. Dr. Heineman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. A pleasure to be here as always.
Several big topics today. I wanted to pick Dr. Heineman's brain on Eric Cantor, the congressional Republicans, Bergdahl, the GOP on immigration, and young illegals sneaking in, and, of course, Iraq. Starting out with immigration. The anti-immigration side says terrorists do or could possibly sneak through the southern border and cause some problems. The pro-immigration side says illegals are not a threat. Anti-immigration says deport. Pro-immigration says that would take forever and hundreds of thousands of buses. Anti-immigration says illegals are getting paid under the table by big corporate America. The pro-immigration side says immigrants pay more in taxes than they cost in welfare. Now you have the Ted Cruzes who are anti-amnesty. I understand Rand Paul is kind of making a change there and heading towards the amnesty direction. Then you have the John McCains and the Chuck Schumers who are for amnesty. So, Dr. Heineman, first question, from a political science viewpoint, who will win on this issue, the Ted Cruzes or the Schumers and the McCains?
I think that the facts are such that some sort of amnesty or adjustment will have to be made. It's not a question of your ideology or your rule of law approach to the world. It's a question of having a lot of people in this country who have entered illegally. And on the other hand, many of whom are hardworking and contributing in many ways in terms of working in the communities. And I think it's important that basically we let them pay taxes and join the tax rolls like everyone else. But I think the facts are such that it's really going to force some sort of adjustment. The current situation is getting to the point, frankly, where it is untenable, and this whole issue of drug cartels does become more and more a concern, because if you don't have a clear and coherent drug or immigration enforcement policy, it allows these cartels, I think, to take advantage of slipping through the cracks in the rather porous system we have in place right now. Now, I don't know if you want to talk, Brian, at all about the unoccupied illegal youngsters coming in.
That was my next question.
I see, yes. Well, I treated Kevin Doran a little roughly on that here a couple of shows ago.
And you're feeling guilty, Dr. Bob.
Schadenfreude, yes, a little guilt feeling there. Looking into it a little more closely, this is a very serious issue. And I don't think we can really blame Obama for this. Unfortunately, some of the nutcases out there are saying that this is really the Obama administration's caused by the Obama administration. That is not, I think, the case. And nonetheless, it is a serious problem, and I talked to some of my people in immigration who work closely with immigrants and illegal immigrants coming in this country. And basically, it appears to be a problem stemming out of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, where the drug cartels have gained a tremendous amount of influence in those countries. And what's happening is these drug cartels are recruiting kids at age, as this my informant said, as early as 7,
wow.
But certainly teenagers into the drug cartels, and they really don't have any choice. And a lot of these kids are taking off, heading north to get away from this. And one of the problems is, of course, once you're in a drug cartel, you never can get out. They just won't. Some of these people have religious conversions, things of that sort. Doesn't make any difference. You're not getting out. So these kids, there's a freight train called the Beast, which runs from the southern Mexico border up to the north, and these kids are hopping on and riding it on the tops and wherever they can grab on there, and taking that to the north. And once they get the border, I guess they just head on across to relative safety in this country. It puts our authorities in a really bad spot, because most of these kids are between 12 and 17 years of age, and they're trying to escape a really ugly situation. Now, the Mexicans have a department in place where they will take these kids back. In other words, we can send the Mexicans back to Mexico, and they have a bureaucratic system set up that will handle them. But Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, the government really is is very weak. Their police force, military forces, not much to speak about. Plus, there's huge amounts of money coming back into those countries from apparently the Mexican drug cartels. So they're buying off officials left and right. It's a very ugly situation. And what my informant told me was that MS-13, which stands for a couple of Mexican Spanish words, is one of the huge drug cartels involved in this. And what's interesting is this drug cartel started in Los Angeles back in the 1980s and has since moved back to Mexico and these Central American countries. And they're really vicious, very large, well-organized, and not only into drugs but human trafficking and smuggling people across the border. It's a huge organization, and what's interesting is what can they do with these kids from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador? There's no place to send them. They try to find family members here to take care of them, and a lot of them end up in foster care, and one of the national centers is in Rochester. So Rochester is getting some of these kids coming across the border down along the Rio Grande are ending up in foster care up in Rochester. It's a very ugly situation, and the point is once these kids get in here, there's not much you can do except try to find a place for them. And to blame the Obama administration for causing this, I think, is totally erroneous. Now, to blame the Obama administration for not getting something done about this, that's another story.
Well, that brings us to another point. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder says he'll provide lawyers for every illegal alien child. Your take on that?
Yes, well, I think they already have volunteer organizations out there who are doing this, and I assume some of them are funded by state and local governments or feds as well. Yeah, I mean, I guess the point is you got to have some protection for these kids, and I guess the feds, have to provide some way of dealing with them. You can't just turn them loose on the streets. So, in terms of putting up some sort of system by which you could see these kids get an education and are halfway decently treated, I guess we're going to have to do something. I don't see you sending them back to Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador. I'm not quite sure how geographically you would even pull that off. But that seems to be the cause of it. And, again, we see around the world here governments just totally incapable of handling crime and insurgency and other kinds of disruptive factors.
MSNBC's Ed Schultz says this is what he says: the whole anti-immigration, illegal immigration movement is racist, that it's whites against the non-whites, not wanting the non-whites to come in. Your take on that?
That's garbage.
That's it?
That's my take, yeah.
Moving on to the House GOP primary that Virginia Republican Congressman Eric Cantor lost Tuesday night. First question. Congressman Tom Reed was friends with Eric Cantor. Reed says in an email to us, the people of Virginia have spoken. As far as Martha Robertson goes, the Democrat congressional candidate, would the Cantor race affect Tom Reed at all in any way?
No, I think not. I think there are a number of things involved in the Cantor race. First and foremost, I must say, Randolph-Macon probably is not going to have any trouble with enrollment here in the next few years because both the candidates who are going to be on the ticket are professors at Randolph-Macon. I don't know quite how they pull that off. But I think the basic problem is that Cantor, first, I don't think he relates particularly well to the common person. Second, I think he did not pay much attention or enough attention to the people who vote for him. He was running all over the country trying to help other candidates like Tom Reed and others at fundraisers. And getting on talk shows and things of that sort. And naturally, as a spokesman for the Republicans in the House, he would do a lot of that. But I think basically running around in terms of working fundraisers and such, he was looking for the time when John Boehner might step aside and he could call on some of these people to become Speaker of the House himself. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But I think basically it's a question of his ability to relate to his constituents and his ability to physically be there and talking to them, holding town meetings and stuff. So Tom Reed, for example, has held a huge number of town meetings. Every weekend he's back in the district holding 3 or 4 town meetings, meeting with people. So I think you have two different styles, and I think in Cantor's case, it came back and hit him in the back. Now, what is also interesting in that race, I was noticing the other day, his pollster has a lot to answer for, it seems to me. As you know, and the audience knows, I think Mr. Bratt spent something like $200,000, maybe a little more. I would expect once somebody saw the polls tightening up, some of these conservative groups maybe kicked in more money. But a couple $100,000, $300,000, and Cantor spent something like $5.2 million in the race. And his pollster now is saying that their surveys showed them up something like 54 points going into the last 2 weeks of the election. Now, I'd say that pollster has some problems. He's claiming that because it's an open primary, a lot of Democrats moved across to vote for Bratt against Cantor. Now, some of that may have happened, but it's been an open primary for many, many years, and nothing like this occurred. And additionally, in terms of situations like that, it's very hard to get Democrats to come over and vote Republican or get Republicans to go over and vote Democrat. They just don't want to do it. So to argue that that's the cause, I think it might have contributed some, but Bratt's victory over Cantor was decisive, over 10 points. So I don't know where this pollster is coming from, but...
The Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel said Wednesday that the risks to Sergeant Bergdahl at the time he was being held, that the risks were increasing at that time, and the government had to move when they did in order to get Bergdahl out alive. Critics argue Bergdahl was a traitor. There's a little speculation there that Bergdahl might not have been treated as badly as it was being claimed. The critics say that the prisoner swap was a bad deal and set a bad precedent, so in the future more U.S. prisoners will be taken so that more Taliban prisoners can be gotten out of U.S. jails. Your thoughts on the exchange of Bergdahl for 5 members of the Taliban, Dr. Heineman?
Well, again, I think the critics are totally out of line in this. They have no idea, frankly, the facts of the situation. Now, the one point I think that you can criticize legitimately is the president's refusal or failure to contact or consult Congress on that. I think that is a huge mistake and apparently even a violation of federal law in that area. So there I think they have a legitimate. But the rest of that I think is totally make-believe. And the idea that somehow the Taliban would go out and start grabbing as many prisoners as they could, I don't know why they wouldn't do that anyway. I mean, I'm sure if they had a chance, they would certainly do that. So the idea that somehow this is going to accelerate that, I mean, that's another exercise, I think, in make-believe. Now, what Bergdahl did and why he did it, I think the military has every right to call him into account. And I assume the military will set up an investigating panel, and this man could well end up in the brig for some time. I don't know, but there's evidence there that needs to be examined. And if, in fact, he was at fault, then I think he has to be called to account. I do think, though, taking the people out of Gitmo and sending them back over to the Middle East, I don't have any problem with that because, as I've said before, I don't think the feds know what they're going to do with these guys in Gitmo, and the idea that these guys are not going to engage in activity against us, certainly they will. But when they get out there in the field and they're engaging in activity against us, that gives us a chance then to deal with them in a little more definitive fashion than we can deal with them at Guantanamo. And I think we can work that out. Could turn out to be a win-win situation there.
The current situation in Iraq, your thoughts there?
I think it's a tragic situation. I think the fact that we've lost something like, 4,400 soldiers in Iraq, and then watching the whole thing deteriorate once again into civil war, it's just sad. And it's there I think you have to blame the Obama administration pretty clearly. And the American people may be saying, well, we don't want our troops in there, we don't want our boys being wounded and killed, but somewhere, somebody has to provide some kind of stability. And once again, we're in a situation where people have committed to us, and now all of a sudden the whole thing is falling apart, so that the Sunni insurgents, tied fairly closely to al-Qaeda, I guess, are giving the Shiites and the established government a real battle. Now, whether they'll be able to invade Baghdad or not is another question. I think the Kurds up in the northern part of Iraq are looking pretty good right now. Nobody is messing around with them. So I think it may well be that Iraq will have to be divided up into three different sectors and let the three groups, the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shiites, try to establish some sort of government in these sectors. Other than that, the situation in Iraq is deteriorating to kind of situation you have in Syria. On the other hand, Maliki is, in fact, a legitimately elected leader in Iraq. But from what I can see, the insurgents are acting with a lot more sophistication than they have in the past, so that they're going out of their way to assure the towns like Mosul and others that they're not going to harm them, they're going to work with them and such. So they're developing some counter-terrorist strategies on their own. It's a bad situation, Brian.
Down to a couple of minutes, Dr. Heineman, if we could cover a state issue.
Okay, sure.
Common Core. Sunni Chancellor Nancy Zimfer's come out in favor of it. She's trying to rally as many educators in New York State as she can to get behind Common Core. State Education Commissioner John King gave a video interview to the Poughkeepsie Journal, and King says Common Core is here to stay. But the State Teachers Union NYSA is doing a heavy statewide online campaign to change teacher evaluations and to delay the impacts of Common Core. So who wins here, the State Education Commissioner or NYSUT?
Well, I don't know, Kevin. Brian, you keep putting this in a kind of competitive either-or situation. I'm not certain in politics that you get that kind of clear-cut result. I think the New York State Senate race may well have some effect on what happens to Common Core. But you may be aware that in California, a state judge has just tossed out the California tenure system for public school teachers.
How does that affect New York?
Well, it doesn't directly, but the precedent is there that the idea that this is in fact discriminatory against various elements in the system. And in fact, I guess the judge quoted Brown v. Board of Education and the need for equal treatment in education in her decision. So if you get a few states doing this, then it does begin to edge up and impact the law in New York State, because it provides precedents from major states and systems. So I think there are some other factors coming into play here, and the idea, I think, well, I don't want to say too much about the head of the New York State education system, but they might be looking around for someone else there to be their spokesperson. I got nothing against Ms. Sinfer. That's SUNY. That's a whole different ballgame, but I'm not certain they have the most effective spokesperson there in the Common Core thing. So I think the idea that somehow it's here to stay, it may be here to stay, but the way they're implementing it and imposing it probably is not here to stay.
And final question. Cuomo has been irritating the school unions, a powerful group in New York State. How far will he go to do this? Can you see him as going as far as maybe like a Scott Walker in Wisconsin, or is the New York voter base too different from Wisconsin?
Yeah, well, I think I don't know why Cuomo would do that. There's no need for him to do that. In Wisconsin, Walker faced some serious budgetary problems in terms of pensions and in terms of demands for salary increases, where frankly he and the Republicans had to take some action. And in Wisconsin, it appears to have turned out really quite well. But the idea that Cuomo would stand fast as Walker did in Wisconsin does not strike me as a Cuomo trait. And so I don't see him taking on any groups that he doesn't actually have to in the next few months.
Dr. Robert Heineman, thanks for joining us.
A pleasure, Brian, and perhaps we can do this again sometime.
All righty, I'm Brian O'Neill. Stay with us. NBC is next on AM 1480 WLEA Hornell. Hornell.